They sat me behind a pillar at my own sister's wedding. Not metaphorically. Not I felt left out. Literally behind a thick decorative post that blocked half the ceremony, like I was an inconvenience they couldn't fully hide but didn't want on display either. People walked past my row, smiling, chatting, taking pictures, and nobody looked at me long enough to register I belonged there. And then a stranger sat down beside me, leaned in like we were old friends, and said, "Just follow my lead, pretend you're my date." But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually began, 3 months earlier, when that cream-colored envelope showed up in my mailbox like a polite warning. It was a Tuesday in April. I was living in Denver, working as a pastry chef at a small boutique bakery downtown, the kind of place with open shelves and handwritten labels and customers who took their croissants way too seriously. My apartment was small, warm, and constantly smelled like whatever experiment I'd baked at midnight. That week it was honey lavender croissants, because I like making my life harder for no reason. I'd been up since 4 a.m. that day. By the time I got home around 2 in the afternoon, my feet ached, my hair was pinned up like a desperate promise, and I was ready to collapse. I almost missed the envelope wedged between bills and grocery circulars, but the paper was thick and fancy, the kind of mail that stands out like it knows it's important. Victoria. My older sister. The golden one. The everything she does is graceful daughter. The one our mother spoke about the way people talk about a trophy, always shining, always placed in the center. The invitation was exactly what I expected from her. Formal. Traditional. Perfect. White embossed lettering. A venue name that sounded expensive. A date circled in my brain like a deadline. Victoria was getting married. To someone named Gregory. A name I didn't remember ever hearing, which told you everything about how our relationship had been going. We spoke just often enough to keep the illusion alive, and that was it. The kind of contact that looks fine from the outside, but feels like standing in a doorway you're not allowed to enter. I held the invitation in my hands and tried to feel happy like a normal sister would. I really did. But what rose up first was a memory from 6 months earlier, Thanksgiving at our mother's house in the suburbs. I had brought a pumpkin cheesecake I worked on for 2 days. Not because anyone asked me to, but because that's how I show love. I made a spiced cream cheese filling with a ginger snap crust, balanced the sweetness, baked it low and slow so it stayed silky. It was genuinely beautiful. Victoria showed up with a store-bought pie. Our mother barely looked at my cheesecake before shoving it to the far corner of the buffet like it was trying too hard. "Evelyn, you really didn't have to go to all that trouble," she said, with that tone that sounds like a compliment if you don't listen closely. Then she turned to Victoria's pie like it was sacred. "This looks lovely, sweetheart. So classic. So traditional." That was our family in one moment. Victoria could arrive empty-handed and be celebrated for breathing. I could carry the moon in on a silver tray and somehow it would be too much, too showy, too desperate. Inside the envelope was a small note card in my sister's perfect handwriting. "Evelyn, I know we haven't been as close lately, but it would mean everything to have you there. You're my only sister." I stared at that line for a long time, then called her that night. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding distracted, like she had me on speaker while doing something more important. That was also familiar. "Victoria, I got your invitation." "Congratulations." "Oh good," she said. I was worried it might get lost. "Of course. I'll be there. Tell me about Gregory. How did you meet him?" There was a pause, just a second too long, like she had to decide what version of the story I deserved. At a pharmaceutical conference, she finally said. "He's a regional director at Bennett Health Solutions. Very established. Very successful. Mom adores him." Of course she did. I swallowed something sharp and forced my voice into warmth. "I'm happy for you." "Thank you," she said quickly. "I have to run. We're meeting with the planner in 20 minutes. I'll send details later." Then she hung up before I could even say goodbye. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone like it had just slapped me, and that familiar feeling settled in my chest. Not quite anger. Not quite sadness. More like the ache of being permanently second place, even in conversations that were supposed to be about family. The weeks leading up to the wedding became a blur of work and preparation. I requested time off, which my boss did not love, because June is bakery chaos season. I bought a dress that was pretty but not loud, a soft blue that wouldn't pull attention, because apparently I still believed I had to manage my own presence like it was a problem. And I noticed something else. Victoria never asked me to be a bridesmaid. Not once. I found out through social media that she had 5 bridesmaids. Friends from college. Friends from work. Even our cousin Jessica, who she barely spoke to for years. All in matching robes and champagne flutes and captions about sisterhood. Not me. I called and asked about it, pretending it didn't matter even though it did. The party is already set, she said, like it was a calendar appointment she couldn't move. You understand, right? These are people I see all the time. I understood perfectly. I understood that our shared childhood meant nothing compared to her current circle. I understood I wasn't part of her inner world. I was a title. Sister. A box to check. A person to invite so nobody could say she didn't. The wedding was at an upscale resort outside Denver, late June, mountains and lake views and lawns so manicured they looked edited. I drove there alone with my dress hanging in the back seat and a gift on the passenger side, wrapped in silver paper. I'd spent weeks choosing it, settling on a set of handcrafted ceramic bowls from a local artist. Thoughtful. Useful. A way of saying I care, even if you don't. I arrived 2 hours early, stupidly hopeful I could find Victoria, offer help, share a moment that felt real. The bridal suite was packed with laughing women in matching robes, a photographer capturing every angle of perfection. I knocked softly. Victoria glanced up from her makeup chair and met my eyes for maybe half a second before looking away. You're early, she said. I thought I could help, I said, trying to sound casual. Everything's handled, she replied. Why don't you go find your seat, okay? We're about to start. One of the bridesmaids I didn't recognize giggled and whispered to another woman, then they both smiled at me with that polite expression that means please leave. I backed out, cheeks burning, and told myself I was fine. That I wasn't there to be included. I was there to show up. That's what good sisters do. Outside, the ceremony area was still being finalized, staff adjusting flowers that already looked perfect. I wandered toward the seating to find my name card, expecting it would be somewhere close enough to say I mattered. I found it in the last row. Not just the last row, but tucked behind a decorative pillar that supported the ceremony arbor, blocking my view like I was being punished with interior design. I stood there holding that little card with my name in elegant script, and something inside me cracked in a quiet, ugly way. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Victoria wasn't just keeping me at a distance, she was putting me where she didn't have to deal with me. Out of sight. Out of frame. Out of the story. For a moment, I almost turned around. I could have gone back to my car, driven home, and spent the day eating ice cream straight from the container like a dramatic movie character. But stubbornness glued my feet to the ground. I was her sister. I was invited. And I wasn't going to disappear just because she wanted me to. Guests arrived. Laughter floated through the air. My mother swept in 20 minutes before the ceremony in a champagne-colored gown that probably cost more than my rent, escorted to the front row, glowing like she was the one getting married. She never looked back. And at exactly 5, the music started, and my sister walked down the aisle looking like perfection. From behind my pillar, I saw maybe 40% of it. Mostly the backs of heads. A partial view of the officiant. A glimpse of lace, a flash of veil. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone back there. A man sat 2 chairs away from me, partially hidden by the same pillar, wearing a charcoal suit that fit like it was made for him. Early 30s, dark hair, sharp features, the kind of face that makes people stare without meaning to. But the thing that caught me wasn't how handsome he was. It was his expression. He looked just as out of place as I felt. He noticed me looking and offered a small, sympathetic smile, like he already understood the whole situation without a single explanation. The ceremony ended. Applause rose, people stood, and the crowd began drifting toward cocktail hour. And the stranger turned toward me like we were about to face a battle together. Up close, he was even more disarming. Not just attractive in that magazine cover way, but alert, like his eyes actually processed what they looked at. Gray, steady, a little amused, as if he'd already decided life was ridiculous and he was going to navigate it with humor. "That was quite a view, wasn't it?" he said, voice light. I let out a dry breath. "Spectacular. I especially enjoyed the back of the guy's head in row 8. Very cinematic." He laughed, and it wasn't the polite laugh people do when they're being nice. It was real, like I had actually surprised him. "I'm Julian," he said. "And I'm guessing, based on your prime seating assignment, you're either someone's least favorite relative or you insulted the wedding planner." I blinked once, because I wasn't used to anyone calling it what it was. "Evelyn," I replied. "And I'm the bride's sister." His eyebrows lifted so fast it was almost funny. "Her sister." "Only sibling," I added, because why not make it worse? He stared at the pillar, then back at me, like he was trying to understand how anyone could justify that. "And they put you back here?" I shrugged like it didn't matter, even though I felt my throat tighten. Apparently I don't match the wedding aesthetic. Julian studied me for a second longer than a stranger normally would, and I had the uncomfortable feeling he was seeing through my jokes, straight to the bruise underneath. "Well," he said quietly, "that's their loss." Then his tone shifted back into something lighter. "Cocktail hour is about to start, and I have a feeling it's going to be just as awkward as that ceremony. What do you say we face it together?" I narrowed my eyes at him. "You don't have to pity me." "It's not pity," he said immediately. "It's strategy." He glanced toward the crowd like he was assessing the battlefield. "I'm here as a +1 for a business associate who couldn't make it. Which means I know exactly 3 people at this wedding, and 2 of them are the couple who just got married, so they won't remember I exist for the next 4 hours. I couldn't help it, I smiled a little. "So really," he continued, "you'd be doing me a favor." There was something genuine in the way he said it. No condescending sweetness. No fake concern. Just an offer from someone who clearly understood what it felt like to be placed on the margins. Before I could overthink it, he extended his arm with this old-fashioned confidence that made it weirdly hard to say no. "Shall we?" I hesitated for half a second, then linked my arm through his. And just like that, I wasn't invisible anymore. Not fully. Not in my head. We walked toward the cocktail hour pavilion overlooking the lake. Round tables scattered under soft light, flowers everywhere, candles everywhere, as if the entire resort had been paid to pretend love was effortless. A bar stretched along one wall, servers floated through with trays of appetizers that looked like tiny works of art. I noticed because I can't help it. Food is my language. A good appetizer is a small promise. A bad one is an insult. Julian stayed close as we moved through the crowd. People glanced over, curious, the way guests always are when they see an unfamiliar face. A few women actually looked at him a second longer, then looked at me like they were trying to figure out the pairing. And I realized what it meant. The handsome stranger had chosen to stand beside the girl nobody noticed. We found a quieter table near the edge. Julian returned with 2 glasses of wine and a plate stacked with appetizers like he'd sweet-talked a server into feeding us properly. He slid into the chair across from me, relaxed. "Okay," he said. "Tell me about your sister. What's she like when she's not starring in the wedding of the century?" I took a slow sip of wine, buying myself time. The truth felt too sharp to hand to someone I met 20 minutes ago. But Julian's gaze didn't feel invasive. It felt patient. Victoria is perfect, I finally said. Or at least she works very hard to appear perfect. Good grades, good career, good relationships. She's the daughter every parent dreams of. And you're not, he said, not cruelly. Just like he was finishing a sentence I'd already started. I let out a small laugh that wasn't happy. I'm the daughter who became a pastry chef instead of a doctor or lawyer. I live in a small apartment. I date occasionally instead of landing someone impressive. I'm the one who didn't follow the script. Julian picked up a crab cake and looked at it like he was thinking. Being a pastry chef sounds creative. Difficult. It's a craft. Try telling my mother that, I said. She introduces me as Evelyn who works with food. Like I'm flipping burgers. He held my gaze. Family dynamics can be complicated. That's a diplomatic way of saying my family is a mess, I muttered, and grabbed a stuffed mushroom because suddenly I was starving. I hadn't eaten all day. It's amazing how humiliation kills your appetite until the moment it doesn't. What about you? I asked. What do you do that got you invited to this little royal celebration? He smiled. Renewable energy consulting. My firm helps businesses transition to sustainable practices. That doesn't sound boring. It's usually received as boring, he said. Most people just want to ask me if I can get them a deal on solar panels. His smile was there, but something guarded flickered behind it. Like he was used to being reduced to what he could provide. I was supposed to be here with my colleague Dominic, he continued. He actually knows the groom through a business connection. But he got pneumonia last week, and I got volunteered as the replacement. So you're a wedding substitute, I said. Exactly. Which means I'm basically a polite crasher. I tilted my glass. Then we're both outcasts. Survivors, he corrected, and clinked his glass lightly against mine. We talked through the rest of cocktail hour, and for the first time since I arrived, the tightness in my chest loosened. Julian asked real questions. Not small talk. He wanted to know what I loved making, what inspired me, what it felt like to work in a kitchen where every mistake shows up publicly on a plate. I told him about the satisfaction of creating something beautiful, the way pastry is precise and emotional at the same time. A little too much heat, and the sugar turns bitter. A little too much pressure, and the dough collapses. It's delicate. Like me, apparently. He told me about his work, about trying to convince companies to change without pretending change is painless. He spoke with real intensity, like he actually cared about the future instead of just his paycheck. You really believe in what you do, I said, surprised. He glanced around the pavilion. Is that so surprising? Most people here seem more interested in looking successful than being passionate about anything. His eyes narrowed slightly, studying me. You notice a lot for someone sitting behind a pillar. I gave him a small, honest shrug. When you're invisible, you learn to watch. It's amazing what you see when nobody realizes you're looking. A server approached and announced dinner was being served in the main ballroom. Guests began flowing inside in that elegant, practiced way people do at expensive events. Julian stood and offered his hand like we were already a unit. Ready to see if your dinner seat is any better? He asked. I let out a humorless laugh. At this point, I'm expecting a chair in the kitchen. We found the place cards at the entrance. My name was in the far corner of the room at a table that looked like it had been created specifically for people nobody knew where to put. The angle meant I'd have to crane my neck to see the head table. Most of the chairs around it were empty, like they were waiting to fill it with whoever didn't fit anywhere else. I stared at the card, heat rising in my face. This is ridiculous. Julian appeared beside me, holding his own place card. I'm on the opposite end of the room, he said, tone dry. Almost like someone wanted to make sure the unimportant guests were spread out evenly so we wouldn't cluster. My composure finally cracked. I'm her sister, I snapped softly. Her only sibling. And she's treating me like I'm a distant coworker she felt obligated to invite. Julian looked at me for a moment, then made a decision. You know what, he said. Screw the seating chart. Before I could respond, he plucked my place card off the table and slid it into his pocket. He did the same with his. What are you doing? I hissed. Improvising, he said smoothly. Just follow my lead and pretend you're my date. Then he guided me across the room toward a table much closer to the head table, one clearly filled with the type of guests who didn't get placed in corners. My heart pounded like we were committing a crime. He pulled out a chair for me, his hand warm on my back as I sat down, then he took the seat beside me like he belonged there. Julian, I whispered, panicking. We can, he said quietly, not looking at me. And we did. The table began filling with people who spoke with corporate confidence, the kind that's half entitlement, half networking. Julian greeted them casually, like he knew them. Like he belonged in their world. A woman introduced herself as Patricia, Vice President of Operations at Bennett Health Solutions. She smiled at Julian, then looked at me. And you must be Julian's girlfriend, she said warmly. He's been keeping you a secret. My mouth opened instinctively to correct her. Julian beat me to it, smooth as silk. Evelyn prefers to stay out of the spotlight, he said. She's not usually one for corporate events, but she made an exception for this wedding. Patricia's smile brightened. How sweet. And how do you know the bride and groom? Julian turned slightly, the answer landing like a match. Evelyn is Victoria's sister, actually. Patricia blinked, and I watched surprise ripple across her face. Oh, she said carefully. I had no idea Victoria had a sister. And in that one sentence, my humiliation turned into something sharper. Because now it wasn't just my family treating me like I didn't exist. It was proof they had erased me so thoroughly even their important guests didn't know I was part of the story. Patricia recovered quickly, the way people trained in corporate spaces always do. Surprise flickered, then smoothed into something polite and carefully neutral. Oh, I'm sure it just never came up, she added, though the way her smile tightened suggested she realized exactly how strange that sounded. I'm sure, I replied, matching her tone, even as something twisted in my chest. Victoria had worked closely enough with these people to plan parts of her wedding, and she had never once mentioned she had a sister. Not even casually. Not even in passing. Dinner was served in courses, each plate more elaborate than the last. Seared scallops, a crisp salad, then a choice between beef tenderloin and herb-crusted salmon. It was excellent food, technically speaking, but I barely tasted it. I was too aware of Julian beside me, the way he leaned in slightly when I spoke, the way his hand rested on the back of my chair like it belonged there. He included me in every conversation. Asked my opinion. Redirected questions to me when people spoke over me. Made space for me in a way no one at that wedding had bothered to do all day. For the first time, I felt present instead of tolerated. Speeches began. Gregory's father stood first, talking about his son's achievements, his career, how proud he was to welcome Victoria into the family. He described her as elegant, sophisticated, exactly the woman he'd always hoped Gregory would marry. Then my mother stood. Her speech was warm, polished, full of stories about Victoria's childhood, her determination, her grace. She talked about wedding planning, about mother-daughter moments, about how she always knew Victoria would achieve great things. She never mentioned me. Not once. Not even as an aside. Not as, and her sister Evelyn is here tonight. Nothing. I felt Julian's hand slide into mine under the table, fingers threading through mine like he knew exactly when I needed an anchor. I squeezed back, grateful I wasn't alone in that moment. More speeches followed. Jokes. Sentiment. Applause. I sat there, nodding politely, smiling when expected, feeling like a ghost sitting among the living. Dessert finally arrived, a towering chocolate raspberry creation that looked stunning and tasted fine. The ganache was too sweet, the cake too dense, the balance off. Julian noticed my expression immediately. Not impressed. It's beautiful, I admitted quietly. But beauty isn't everything. The execution's off. The chocolate overwhelms the raspberry instead of working with it. Could you do better? He asked. In my sleep, I said, surprising even myself with the confidence in my voice. But it was true. This was the one area of my life I never doubted. I believe you, he said simply. The reception shifted into dancing. Victoria and Gregory took the floor for their first dance, all perfect lighting and practiced grace. They looked like a magazine spread come to life. Then my father joined Victoria for the father-daughter dance. I watched them sway together, memories rising uninvited. Him spinning me around our old living room when I was small. Before the divorce. Before everything fractured. Julian stood and offered his hand. Dance with me. You don't have to keep playing the attentive date, I said. I know, he replied. I want to. So I went with him. He was a better dancer than he'd claimed, confident without being showy. We moved easily, and for a few minutes, the rest of the room faded. No hierarchy. No comparison. Just music and motion and the strange comfort of being seen. Thank you, I whispered. For tonight. For everything. You're interesting, he said softly. More interesting than anyone else here. You barely know me. I know enough. You're talented. You see through the nonsense. And you're hurting, even when you pretend you're not. That takes strength. His words landed somewhere tender. My eyes burned, and I turned away before tears could fall. We stepped outside for air, onto a terrace strung with fairy lights. The night was cool, calming. I leaned against the railing, exhaustion finally catching up to me. I shouldn't have come, I admitted. I hoped it would be different. Julian stood beside me, close but not crowding. Family can hurt us in ways strangers never could. You sound like you've lived that. My father and I haven't spoken in years, he said. I chose a life he didn't approve of. He chose not to accept it. I looked at him differently then, saw the weight behind his kindness. Sometimes, he continued, the family we choose matters more than the one we're born into. Before I could respond, voices spilled onto the terrace, breaking the moment. We returned inside for the cake cutting, more perfect photos, more applause. Later, my mother approached our table, eyes narrowing slightly when she saw where I was sitting. This table is reserved for Gregory's associates, she said. Julian answered smoothly before I could. There was a seating mix-up. Evelyn and I are here together. Her gaze swept over him, reassessing me instantly based on the man beside me. The shift made my stomach turn. Oh, she said, smiling tightly. I didn't realize you were seeing someone. We've been keeping things quiet, Julian said, his hand finding mine again. She left shortly after, satisfied enough. When Victoria and Gregory finally reached our table, Victoria looked genuinely startled to see me there. Her smile was polite, distant. Evelyn, you look lovely, she said. Like she was greeting a colleague. Congratulations, I replied. The wedding is beautiful. Julian introduced himself, and I watched the recognition dawn in her eyes when she realized who he was and why he mattered. It was subtle, but it was there. Later, as sparklers lit the night and the couple made their exit, Julian walked me back toward the resort. He draped his jacket over my shoulders when I shivered, an old-fashioned gesture that caught me off guard. At the entrance, he stopped, hesitating like he didn't want the night to end. I'd like to see you again, he said. Outside of all this. I hesitated, then nodded. I'd like that too. He kissed me, gentle and unhurried, then disappeared toward the elevators. I stood there for a long moment, wearing his jacket, heart racing. And for the first time in years, I felt something unexpected. Hope. I barely slept that night. I lay in the quiet hotel room staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the evening like my mind was afraid to let it go. The pillar. The speeches where my name never appeared. My mother's look of irritation. Victoria's surprise when she realized I was suddenly visible. And Julian. His voice. His hand in mine. The way he looked at me like I mattered without needing to be convinced. Morning light finally crept through the curtains, soft and forgiving. For a few seconds after waking, I forgot where I was. Then it all came rushing back. I showered, took extra care getting dressed, not because I needed approval, but because for once I wanted to show up as myself, fully. Julian was waiting in the lobby right on time. Jeans, sweater, relaxed confidence. He smiled when he saw me, the kind of smile that reaches the eyes without effort. "Good morning," he said. "You look amazing." "So do you," I replied, surprising myself with how easy it felt. Breakfast overlooked the lake. Calm. Quiet. Nothing like the forced perfection of the wedding. We talked about work, about travel, about childhood memories. He listened in a way that felt rare, like he wasn't waiting for his turn to speak. "You light up when you talk about baking," he said. "It's obvious you love it." "It's the one place I never doubt myself," I admitted. "No comparison. No competition. Just skill." "Then why let your family make you feel small everywhere else?" The question was gentle, but it hit hard. "Because they're my family," I said. "And some part of me still wants their approval." "What if you stopped wanting it?" I didn't have an answer. Before we parted, Julian asked to see me again. Not as a favor. Not as a rescue. Because he wanted to. I said yes. The following weeks felt different from anything I'd known before. Julian didn't rush me. He didn't try to impress me. He showed up consistently. Dinners. Conversations. Long walks where silence felt comfortable instead of awkward. Then my sister called. She wanted lunch. The timing wasn't lost on me. She'd heard about Julian. About his work. About his connections. Suddenly, I existed again. We met at a restaurant she chose, expensive but familiar to her world. She looked polished, confident, still riding the glow of her perfect wedding. "I wanted to catch up," she said. "You've been busy." "I always have been," I replied. She asked about Julian. Carefully. Casually. Too carefully. "He seems very successful," she added. There it was. The conversation shifted when I brought up the wedding seating. I didn't soften it. I didn't laugh it off. "It wasn't an accident," I said. "It was humiliating." She tried to justify it. Blamed the planner. Timing. Logistics. "You never even mentioned having a sister to your colleagues," I said. Her composure cracked just enough. "You chose a life mother couldn't brag about," she said finally. That created distance. The words hurt less than I expected. They confirmed what I'd always known. "I'm done apologizing for being myself," I told her. "I love my life. If that embarrasses you, that's your problem." I left without waiting for her response. When I told Julian, he didn't celebrate. He didn't push. He just said he was proud of me. Then he asked if I was ready to be seen. The Bennett Health event came weeks later. I poured everything into the desserts. Every detail mattered. Every flavor intentional. This wasn't about revenge. It was about excellence. The night of the event, the room was filled with people who had once overlooked me. Now they were tasting my work. Asking my name. Remembering it. Patricia took the microphone and thanked me publicly. Announced a partnership. Applause filled the room. I saw my mother's stunned expression. Victoria's forced smile. 4. Once, I didn't shrink. I stood there knowing I had earned every second of it. Later, Julian pulled me close and whispered, "You were always worth this." And I believed him. The days after the event felt unreal in the quietest way. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just different. Emails started coming in. Real ones. Serious inquiries. Companies asking about availability, menus, collaborations. My boss went from mildly supportive to openly proud, telling anyone who would listen that I was the reason the bakery was suddenly getting attention it had never had before. But what changed the most wasn't work. It was how I walked through the world. I stood a little straighter. I spoke without apologizing first. I stopped shrinking myself to make other people comfortable. Julian noticed it immediately. "You're lighter," he said one evening as we cooked dinner together in my apartment. He was chopping vegetables badly, aggressively, like a man who had never respected a cutting board in his life. "I think I finally stopped waiting for permission," I said. "From my family. From my sister. From my mother. From a version of myself that had believed love had to be earned through comparison." Julian didn't try to fix me. He didn't frame himself as the reason things were better. He just stood beside me while I took ownership of my own life. That was new. And intoxicating. Family gatherings changed too. Not overnight. Not magically. But noticeably. My mother started calling more. Not warmly, not lovingly, but with curiosity. Questions about my work. About upcoming events. About Julian. Victoria became careful around me. Polite. Measured. She never apologized, but she stopped dismissing me. Stopped pretending I wasn't there. I recognized it for what it was. Not love. Not closeness. Respect. The kind that comes when people realize you are no longer optional. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same sister who had seated me behind a pillar was now careful to seat me near her at dinners. The same mother who once spoke over me now listened, even if reluctantly. Julian's world and my world overlapped more naturally than I expected. He never paraded me. Never used me as proof. But people noticed us together. And they noticed how he treated me. Not like an accessory. Not like a favor. Like an equal. One evening, months later, we sat on my couch after a long day. No wine. No music. Just quiet. "I love you," he said, like it wasn't a performance. Like it wasn't a negotiation. I didn't panic. I didn't overthink it. "I love you too," I said. And it felt steady. Not dramatic. Not desperate. Just true. Looking back, the wedding felt like a turning point, not because of the humiliation, but because it forced me to see the truth clearly. I had been invisible by design. Kept small because it served someone else's story. The stranger who sat beside me behind that pillar didn't save me. He didn't rescue me. He simply refused to treat me the way I had accepted for too long. And that changed everything. I stopped chasing approval. Stopped explaining myself. Stopped waiting to be chosen. I chose myself first. The shift didn't happen all at once. It came in quiet moments that didn't look impressive from the outside. Like the first time my mother asked for my opinion and actually waited for the answer. Or the first family dinner where Victoria paused before speaking, checked my face, and adjusted her tone. Not warmer, not kinder, just careful. Careful was new. Julian and I moved in together that winter. Not because it was convenient, not because it made sense on paper, but because it felt natural. Our lives fit together in a way that didn't require performance. We argued sometimes, of course, but never about who was allowed to take up space. That mattered more than I realized. Work continued to grow. One event led to another. Then another. My name started circulating on its own, detached from my sister, detached from Julian, detached from explanations. People knew me for my work. For my consistency. For my standards. I co-owned the bakery within a year. Signing those papers felt heavier than any compliment I'd ever received. This wasn't applause. This was ownership. Responsibility. Proof that I hadn't imagined my worth. Victoria heard about it before I told her. She always did. She invited me to dinner. Just the two of us. I almost said no. Not out of fear, but because I finally understood that access to me was a privilege, not an obligation. But I went. She was different that night. Not softer. Not apologetic. Just honest in a way she'd never allowed herself to be before. I didn't think you'd actually build something like this, she said quietly, staring at her plate. I smiled. I know. She looked up, startled, then sighed. I spent my whole life doing what was expected. And you didn't. And somehow, you ended up happier. That was the closest thing to an apology I was ever going to get. And I didn't need more than that. Because by then, my life no longer revolved around their recognition. Julian proposed on a Sunday morning, barefoot in the kitchen, while I was still in pajamas and the coffee was brewing. No speeches. No audience. Just a ring, a quiet smile, and a question that didn't feel like pressure. I said yes. At our engagement dinner, my mother cried. Real tears. Confused tears. The kind that come when a narrative you've clung to finally collapses. Victoria hugged me. Awkwardly. Briefly. But sincerely enough. And I realized something that night. The real revenge wasn't that they saw me now. It was that I no longer needed them to. I had love that didn't require comparison. Work that didn't require validation. A life that didn't need to look impressive to feel meaningful. The girl behind the pillar didn't disappear. She just stood up. Time did what it always does when you finally stop fighting it. It softened the sharp edges without erasing the truth. Planning the wedding with Julian was nothing like watching Victoria plan hers. There were no performances, no guest lists built around hierarchy, no obsession with how things would look to people who didn't matter. We chose a small venue, good food, and people who actually knew us. That was it. When my mother tried to push suggestions about optics, guest placement, or who should be invited, I stopped her gently but firmly. This wedding isn't about proving anything, I said. It's about us. She looked at me for a long moment, like she was seeing me clearly for the first time. Then she nodded. Not enthusiastically. Not happily. But she nodded. And that was enough. Victoria attended every planning dinner I invited her to. She never tried to take over. Never offered criticism disguised as concern. I could tell she was learning how to exist in a dynamic where she wasn't automatically centered. It didn't come naturally to her, but she tried. That mattered. The bakery became my second home in a new way. Not just a place where I worked, but a place I shaped. I hired people who reminded me of myself, talented, underestimated, quietly brilliant. I paid them fairly. I listened when they spoke. I built the kind of environment I'd once needed and never had. Sometimes, late at night, after closing, I'd stand in the quiet kitchen and think about that pillar at the wedding. About how small I'd felt sitting behind it. About how convinced I'd been that visibility was something granted, not claimed. I was wrong. Visibility isn't given. It's taken the moment you stop accepting erasure. Julian never let me forget that I'd done this myself. Whenever someone praised him for helping me, he corrected them without hesitation. She did the work, he'd say. I just showed up. And that was the truth. On the morning of our wedding, I didn't feel nervous. I felt grounded. When I walked down the aisle, I wasn't thinking about who was watching or what they thought. I was thinking about the life I'd built, the woman I'd become, and the fact that I was choosing this moment freely. After the ceremony, my mother hugged me longer than usual. I was wrong about a lot of things, she said quietly. I see that now. She didn't specify. She didn't need to. Victoria raised her glass during the reception and toasted me. Not Julian. Me. To my sister, she said. Who taught me that there's more than one way to succeed. People clapped. I smiled. But what mattered wasn't the toast. What mattered was that even if she hadn't said it, I would still be standing exactly where I was. Later that night, when the music faded and the guests drifted away, Julian and I sat together under string lights, exhausted and happy. You know, he said, none of this started because you wanted revenge. I nodded. It started because I was tired of being invisible. And now? Now I don't disappear for anyone. Years from now, people might remember the wedding. The bakery. The success. They might tell the story like it was dramatic or cinematic or perfectly planned. But the real turning point was quiet. It was the moment I stopped waiting to be treated like I mattered. And decided to act like I already did. Years later, when people ask me when my life really changed, they expect a dramatic answer. A promotion. A wedding. A public moment where everything shifted at once. I always think back to that chair behind the pillar. To sitting there, perfectly still, dressed carefully, invited but unwanted, realizing that I had spent most of my life hoping someone would eventually turn around and see me. That never happens. People don't suddenly wake up kinder. Families don't magically unlearn the hierarchies they benefit from. And the people who gain comfort from your silence rarely encourage your voice. What changes is the moment you stop cooperating with your own erasure. I didn't win because my sister finally respected me. I didn't win because my mother softened. I didn't win because I found a man with influence. I won because I stopped agreeing with the version of myself they had decided on. Julian didn't give me confidence. He didn't give me status. He didn't rescue me. He simply treated me like I was already enough, and that exposed how little I'd been asking for before. The bakery grew, but more importantly, it became a place where no one was invisible. Where talent mattered more than pedigree. Where quiet excellence wasn't overlooked because it didn't announce itself loudly enough. My relationship with my family settled into something realistic. Not warm. Not broken. Just honest. Boundaries replaced longing. Acceptance replaced hope. And that was peace. Sometimes I still see photos from Victoria's wedding. The flowers. The lights. The perfect symmetry. And I smile, not because it was beautiful, but because I survived it without shrinking. Because I walked in feeling like an afterthought and walked out knowing my worth had never been up for debate. The best revenge wasn't success. It wasn't visibility. It wasn't even respect. It was freedom. Freedom from waiting. From explaining. From proving. From hoping someone else would finally decide I mattered. I mattered the moment I chose myself. And I never sat behind a pillar again.